Dean Ho, everyone. Welcome to another exciting episode of T Dean, guys. I'm Matt.
I'm Brian, and you need to Chang that intro.
Oh, that intro is streets ahead, friend.
Cool.
That was great. That was a lot of fun. I love Community. So I had not been a Community fan because I hadn't watched it until about 2 years ago or 3 years ago or something like that. And since then, I've seen it like 4 or 5 times all the way through. And so I'm looking at all these episodes as we're like, we need to put this list together. And I'm like, holy crap, there are just some like quintessential episodes that are just so fantastic. This was a really hard week to come up with picks for the topic.
Yeah, this is a show that's rare for me because most shows like you, I pick up after it's already established that it's a good show. I remember I was at my sister's house watching The Office. I think it was the season 6 premiere. I want to say that. And Community was airing right after it. So we watched Community the day it premiered right after that. And then I was hooked and I watched. So I was watching it right from day one. So I watched it all the way through as it's airing.
I think it was season 4 of The Office when this started, because I remember like The Office being in its good spot still, and season 6 was when it was starting to get a little bit. That I think that is correct. Season 4.
Well, I know Community started in 2009.
2009. Yeah, that makes sense. Well, whatever. Now I need to know. Season 1 started in 2005. Ho, look at that. So season 4 was 2000. Oh, season 4 is 2008. Oh, well, apparently they did it stupidly. How did they do that many? They did like 3 seasons in the course of a year or something.
Well, season 1 was only 6 episodes. So I think 1 and 2
That's
were
true.
In a year.
Yeah, that makes sense. Look at me. I was about ready to take my victory lap, and then I clicked on season 4. It's like 2008. Like, all right, well, whatever. You stupid show. I don't even care about you anymore. Office.
What season started? Season 2009.
That was season 5.
Okay, so we're in between our picks. There wasn't 4 or 6, but it was 5.
Yeah, because I remember there was like advertisements for the paintball episode in season 2 during like right when I was watching The Office. I'm like, oh, that looks interesting. I would watch that. And I thought it was, well, I thought it was earlier than that. Never mind. Well, I'm wrong. You have it on record. That never happens. I'm wrong. Actually, I need to own up to something because I also want to say another thing that I'm wrong. I was putting all this stuff together, and a couple weeks ago, or maybe it was even last week, I said something about how I'm like, oh, season 4 of Community is better than season 3. My number 1 episode on here is from season 3, and I don't have a season 4 episode on my list. So even by that metric alone, that's probably... Actually, there's another one that I really want to talk about that is like my number 1 favorite episode of Community, period, and that's in season 3 as well. So
season 3 has a lot of these good theme episodes that we're talking about.
Yeah. And so we're talking about themed episodes. So I have one that I left off my list, but I'm going to ask about it at the end to see if that counts as a themed episode, because it has a gimmick, but it's not specifically. I didn't know how we were defining theme.
One thing that I think is interesting about how Community does this, and kind of what I think is they break into different genres, and other shows might do this, but a lot of times other shows will couch it as in like, oh, they're all dreaming, or, oh, this was just in someone's imagination. But when Community does it, most of the time it's within the reality of their show. It's actually happening. And so the realism is brought down to a level where you can believe this is happening in Greendale. I believe there's one episode that I can think of where they did do the dream thing in season 5. And then there was another one where it was happening, but the visuals were in their imagination. I'm not going to say these because I'm not sure if those ones are going to be on your list. But
sure.
Other than those 2 examples, it's all happening within the story, which is really creative that they're able to really dive deep into these genres and really get them well while still keeping it real.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's even the one episode in season 6, the final season, where the GI Joe episode um
That's what I was talking about with
where
it's the dream. That's season 5 actually.
that yeah. Oh, I thought it was season 6. Well,
No,
that's my
Jonathan
fault.
Banks is in that one,
Oh, is
and
he?
Shirley's in
I
that one.
like John. I like Jonathan Banks. That's right, she is.
Yeah,
That's a good episode. It's not on my list though. I'll just
yeah.
tell you that. All right. So let me jump into it because my number 3 is actually like objectively, this probably shouldn't be on the top 3 because there are a lot of other better episodes. But I put it as my number 3 just because it was one of those like right time, right moment for me to watch it. And it was shortly after I had watched the movie it was based off of. So it was kind of a little bit of like a, hey, I'm in on the joke. I get it. And that was from season 1, the episode Contemporary American Poultry. This is not going to make a lot of people's lists of like their top 10 episodes or
It
whatever.
should. It's
I loved it
fantastic.
though. Yeah, I thought it was great. It's an episode that is based off of. It really steals from the movie Goodfellas. See, Abed in this episode, he gets this job as the chicken tenders fry like cook
Hmm.
at the cafeteria, because the chicken tenders are like the only good food in the cafeteria. And Starburns was the one who had that job before that, but he'd always like steal all these chicken tenders and get them to people like his friends. And so the study group was like, we have to do this.
Yeah,
And so right away when they hatch this scheme, they're talking about like what they're gonna do. Abed's like, ooh, this could be like a gangster movie type,
yeah,
or a gangster movie satire. And then like there's like the pause and then a narration comes over. All my life I've always wanted to be a
yeah.
gangster. Like it just like how Goodfellas starts off, and as soon as that line hit I died laughing, and I was in for the rest of the episode. And I really like when it culminated with the song, playing the song Layla, as like all the consequences of their actions are coming out
Yeah.
towards the end of the episode. They just did it really well, and it was really funny.
Well, I think we need to expound on that moment just because there's a really great moment. So he said Abed kind of becomes like the leader of the group, and everyone kind of the group kind of runs a school under Abed's control. And so Abed's
Yep.
getting them a bunch of things, and like I said, he starts to take away the things that he gave them to send a message. And the funniest one is he got Shirley to be close friends with this what they call sexy dreadlock guy. And for Shirley, she walks into the cafeteria, sees Abed staring her straight in the face while he feeds this guy chicken fingers. And it's like, how did Abed get this guy? Like, hey, we need to show Shirley a message. I'm going to feed you chicken fingers. Is that all right? Like, it doesn't make sense, but it's so funny, and he plays it so straight.
Yeah, Abed is just great. Like there's so much they do with Abed throughout this series of like, yeah, he might have a little bit of a mental issue, but he's kind of the most sane one of the group. His is like more on his sleeve, but a lot
Yeah,
of this stuff underneath is like he's really put together, where all these other people are just so insecure and all messed up.
yeah.
It's just funny to see how much control he has and self-confidence inside, because he knows who he is, and because he knows who he is, he's able to exude so much power.
Yeah, and this one was kind of relatable to me because Abed has always been the one who escapes into TV, which I am definitely guilty of that too sometimes. And
Mm-hmm.
with this was kind of his opening. He even said, "I don't need to rely on TV anymore because everyone's speaking the same language, chicken." And
Yep.
it sounds like a joke, but he's serious. Like this is actually like a good moment for Abed because he starts to actually understand the world a little bit in the context
Mm-hmm.
of a mafia movie about chicken tenders.
Yeah, it's a great episode, and it was made even better because I had seen the movie, so I was able to, and I saw it recently, before that episode had hit. So
Yeah. Well, that was a great pick.
thank you. It's your number 3.
My number 3, I'm going to go to Pillows and Blankets from season 3. Was that on your list?
It was not. Nope.
Perfect. So the backstory with this is Troy and Abed in the previous episode had been trying to make a blanket for, or they specifically were trying to make a pillow fort. And they got the chance to get in the Guinness Book of World Record if they make it bigger, quicker by using blankets. And Abed was like, nope, it's going to be just a pillow fort because that's cooler. And it started this whole war. And it turned into this whole documentary war film about the battle of Blanketsburg and Fluffytown, which is the pillow world. And I just think it's interesting. They make these boring documentaries, and it was that are you see a lot of times in educational films where it's the Ken Burns style documentary where the picture's kind of moving. There's like the slow music and the guy with the monotonous voice saying, well, then this happened. And you always associate those with, all right, it's about a battle that happened 300 years ago that no one cares about from you watch in school because you have to. But they make it interesting because they use these devices to tell the story about, essentially it's Abed and Troy's friendship being tested as they fight over pillows and blankets, and everyone gets involved. It's really cool. And the narrator, you know what? Actually, maybe we should save who the narrator is for a trivia question later.
There you go. Yeah, that's a unique thing that's kind of funny.
Yeah.
How that happened. All right. Well, we will save that. So there's your trivia question. We'll revisit it at the end when we actually ask the question. But there's your little spoiler to it. Yeah, that's a good episode. It's just really funny how they're able to do what they do, and like the reading of the tweets, kind of like reading of the war letters that people would have written back then, and status updates, like just how everything was chronicled. The absurdity of it just makes it so. See, that's what's great with these episodes and these shows is that, you know, when they commit to a bit, they really commit to it. So the narrator is like this dead serious narrator, and he reads the lines and he reads everything without an ounce of comedy in it. It's just super dry, and the dryness of his narration versus the absurdity of what he's narrating is what makes this episode so funny.
Agreed. And is around this time in season 3, you notice I think the writers have a goal of, let's see how little we can get Chevy Chase into this episode. Because most of the time when you see Pierce in this episode, he's the pillow man. Like he's like their ultimate weapon, where he's basically he's surrounded by pillows. It's kind of like an homage to the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man from Ghostbusters, I think. And there's no way that was actually Chevy Chase filming that in there. And so I think they only had Chevy Chase's face in like one scene. But you notice that a lot around this time. I think this was around the time when he started to really be difficult behind the scenes. So they're like, all right, let's try to write it in a way where Pierce is just in one scene and then he can be out.
Yeah, it's kind of like the scene towards the end of the season, like the origin of the study group scene, and then Pierce is in it, but it's like he is the guy who screws up the frozen yogurt at the end, and they never show you his face. They show you it from behind, and like
that was actually at the end of season 4. Actually, that was one of the few episodes that Chevy Chase wasn't in before he left.
Oh, that was the end of season 4. Okay, yeah, because season 4, I really noticed it like the last half of the season where, you know, he's just not in a lot of episodes.
Yeah. So. And one of the lines I just love in this episode that just shows the specificity. And again, the narrator is showing this in a completely straight. He's like, a hypoallergenic queen size pillow in a floral print case got lobbed from the west center of the room. And it's just like, you saying that line seriously. It's like, really?
It's ridiculous. I've got another episode that it's a serious theme versus like the silliness of what's happening. And so that episode is in season 2. It's called Epidemiology. Yes, I pronounced it right. There we go. Epidemiology. It is the Halloween episode of season 2 where the study group is at a Halloween party in the study room and the surrounding area around it. And then they have like this meat platter that's out, and they're all eating it. And we find out that actually that meat platter is some sort of military high grade something that wasn't supposed to be consumed, since the dean tried to save money by buying all the food items at a military surplus store.
Yeah.
So after things start going weird and people start turning into zombies, the dean quarantines the whole area because he calls the military, and they're like, oh, well, do that. So he quarantines the whole area, keeps everyone in, and then all of the people start turning into zombies. Every single character turns into a zombie as the thing goes on. Another thing that's really funny about this episode that just highlights the absurdity is the music for the party was the dean's personal playlist. the dean's personal playlist had two things. It had like notes to himself, like audio notes that he would record for reminders, and then it also had ABBA music. And so throughout the whole episode, there's all this like ABBA songs that are happening while they're being tormented by these zombies and chased, and they're running around. And it's so funny because like the way that it ends is just like a perfect use of the song Fernando. The way that the episode ends is that they realize if we turn down the AC, or turn on the AC and turn down the temperature, then it's going to unheat like that part of the brain that's acting out, and it's going to turn everyone back to normal. Not scientific at all, but whatever. No. It's Community. So Troy is able to turn the heat down and get the AC coming on, and then it's like the Fernando song's playing, there's something in the air tonight, and they all start turning back into to regular people. That was a great climax. This also had one of my favorite lines too. I don't even like zombies. I do not like zombies at all, and I love this episode. But Troy, when he's trying to get into there to change the AC, he has to go through all these zombies, and it looks like he's going to be successful. And then one bites him, and then another one gets, and like they get on him, and then he like turns frustrated. Like another one comes out, he's like, "You got me already, all right, guys, fine, got me." And then they like leave him alone as he starts to turn into a zombie.
That's like when you play paintball or something, and like you're clearly been shot, your hands are in the air, and everyone keeps shooting you.
Like, guys, come on. I'm done.
That did have a little bit of a cop out at the end because they did like spritz. The military came in, spritzed everybody with like memory loss, so nobody remembered it for the rest of the season, which kind of is their way of getting around everyone having this like trauma. I feel like that'd be traumatizing to know I was briefly a zombie and almost died.
Yeah. The benefit of that, though, that they did use is they used that to their advantage when they did, because during the zombie attack is when Chang and Shirley hook up in the bathroom, and that's how Shirley gets pregnant. Or I can't even remember if it was Chang's baby or not at the end. I don't even remember how that it wasn't. So anyway, they hook up, and Shirley gets pregnant later, and so that like no one remembered that Chang and Shirley hooked up, except for Chang left a voicemail on Troy's phone.
Yeah.
And he's like, "What happened at that party?" So. Yeah,
it started a whole runner about they don't know if Shirley's baby is Chang's or if it's Andre's. But I do remember at the end when Theo, I'm going to call him Theo because it's Malcolm John Warner, was like, "It's a black person."
That's right. And then they named him Ben after Chang.
Yeah.
Which that's really sad still. Yeah. I don't care how much he helped you at that moment. You're not gonna name him after this guy.
Speaking of Chang and black people, that will bring me into my second choice, number 2.
What a great segue.
So this is an episode that Matt and I briefly talked about earlier today because I realized that this episode has been removed from Netflix due to its brief citing of blackface. And it is Dungeons and Dragons from Netflix and Hulu. So I think the only way you can really watch it is on the DVDs, which I have because, of course, I do. I'll just get that out of the way. So the group gets together to play Dungeons and Dragons because they realize that as kid in the group, or not the group, kid in the school, Fat Neil, is kind of being depressed. They feel like he might commit suicide. So they're trying to get out of his level, do something he likes to do with Dungeons and Dragons. And at the beginning, Chang is with them in clear blackface. And then they even call it out. Shirley's like, "Are we just going to ignore this hate crime?" And he's like, "Well, I'm a black elf." And it's like some fictional character. And Chang gets killed in the game, killed right away, and he leaves. And I don't know, like I think we should say the official stance of this podcast is that blackface is bad, but I don't think that that moment should be depriving audiences of this episode, because this is a great episode. This is one of the ones that I would show people saying, this is this show.
Yeah, and I felt like the joke itself wasn't, it wasn't against black people at all. It was, playing off of like people who think that that's okay, sort of thing. I was kind of joking with Brian earlier today of talking about this. I'm like, well, what's the difference between this and Lord of the Rings? Because Lord of the Rings, they paint the orcs black, and they actually are wearing black paint on their face, but it's not, like the whole thing was that Chang wasn't actually emulating a black person; he was emulating some fictional character. And Pierce was the one who kind of like brought it up, like, "Oh, this is. Let me joke about it." It's like,
Mhm.
no, that's not okay, Pierce. You took this too far. You made it into a race thing, and
It's
so
all yeah,
it's kind of joking that sort of thing was what I felt like it was.
yeah.
But this episode has really good things to say about mental health, and so the
Mhm.
fact that it took this episode, which is a really great episode, very entertaining, and also kind of an important one to talk about, like how you connect with someone who is potentially considering suicide.
Yeah.
It did really well.
One thing that this episode did, and I think it's a really ballsy move, is that it's all the group around the study table. A lot of times in these kind of situations, I know we talked about it a few weeks ago when we talked about our childhood shows, how Rugrats would show us this like fantastical adventure and then cut back to us just them in the backyard. Well, this kind of does that same thing, except we don't get to see the adventure. We don't get to see them out in like the crazy world with the dragons and all that. It's all based on them reading it around the table and their interactions in the real world. But it definitely works. You're still compelled, and you still want them to succeed. And when Pierce comes in as the villain, and especially that shot where they open up like the supply closet, he's like sitting on like some kind of throne. That's like a legit villain shot of Pierce. And whenever you think of Pierce going from in the beginning when he was just misguided but was well meaning to excuse me being a legit villain, I think of that shot.
Yeah, yeah, and it was that's where it's like you look at this episode and you're like, well, what's the lesson to take out of it of how they treated Fat Neil? Because the way the study group was minus Pierce is that they were kind of like coddling him. They set up this adventure to be like you can tell when something's not sincere, and you can tell when something's forced.
Mhm.
And so like I don't think that what their plan was the one that people should have gone with. So it was good that you had this wild card of Pierce coming in and actually giving them a villain that Neil ended up being able to have a purpose with this group instead of like a
Mhm.
fake purpose. Like he really actually was able to contribute and really be a part of this team together.
Yeah.
And that's what I thought was like really cool about this episode. Because like, Pierce antagonized him, and I would never say, hey, you should do that to someone who's depressed or considering
Yeah.
suicide. Don't antagonize them. But it's like you also, as someone who has been depressed in the past, like you don't talk down to someone. You don't like, oh, let me go ahead and pity you. It's just like you bring them into a spot in your life that like you can share with them. You share parts of your life with them. You let them share their excitement and their parts of their life with you, and you kind of build a unity together.
And that unity kept going because in season 5, when they announced that Pierce died, it was actually Neil. He had this announcement, one of our beloved students, Pierce Hawthorne. And at the end, he said, "You were a hell of a D&D player. Time to level up." So even like 3 seasons later, Neil still respected Pierce's game.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
I got a few more things real quick about this episode with it, on the more on the humorous side. So Abed came in with characters designed for specific people, and then they all just grabbed him at random. And Annie ended up being Hector the Well Endowed, which he in, made for Troy, and it made for this really funny, hilarious scene that's actually like super dirty, but they don't show any of the audio, so they get away with it. So in the story, there's like this maiden who's like a non-playable character who Abed is reading, and the whole thing is like Hector the Well Endowed has to sleep with her in order to get some information, and it just cuts to inspirational music, and you see Annie reading as Hector and doing hand gestures, and like you get the reactions of everybody, and then at one point you see Troy start to take notes, and it's just and it's weird because it's Annie and Abed. Abed's playing the woman, Annie's playing the man. There's no actual chemistry between them, but their characters are going through this while everyone's watching. Like, what is happening here?
Yeah, yeah, I like that, and it was great. Like all of them had different looks, like of disgust
Yeah,
or intrigue or like what the heck is going on, sort of
yeah.
thing.
Which
It,
bring
it
sorry, go ahead.
Oh, it kind of reminds me, like you bringing that up, of the other D&D episode that I
Yep.
also really like. This one's obviously like the better one, but the other one's pretty good too. And
Yeah.
I really liked in the other episode Jonathan Banks moment when he
Hmm.
finally embraced like the character,
Yeah.
and he does like an interrogation
Yeah.
goblin. And so like that was a great moment of that episode, like how a cop would treat a goblin, like, just showing
Yeah.
his interrogation techniques.
He
It
starts to
was
turn
really
into Mike
funny.
Ehrmantraut in that scene.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
One thing with that, with when they go back to do Dungeons and Dragons season 5, they do another random character draw, and Annie ends up as Hector the Well Endowed again, but Troy's not there. This is after Troy leaves. So who did Abed intend to be Hector the Well Endowed the second time?
Maybe he just thought, maybe it was for Annie, and he just thought he did such a good job the first time.
Well, the other guess would be the Dean, because the Dean kind of weaseled his way in last minute, and maybe he didn't have a new character for the Dean. He just gave him Hector.
Yeah, maybe.
All right, Matt, what are you on? You're on your number
I'm
one.
on number 1 from season 3. Do you know which one I'm going to say from season 3?
I'm hoping it's the same as mine, so we have more time to talk about it. Is it basic lupine urology?
It's not.
Okay, that's my number one.
It
Spoiler alert.
Mine is digital estate planning.
Oh,
The first episode of Giancarlo Esposito, if we were talking about Breaking Bad characters,
yep.
Gus Fring himself is on this show for a recurring role. But the first that we see him is after Pierce's dad dies, and must have been at the will reading or something like that, that he makes his intentions known of what's going to happen to the company. So Giancarlo Esposito's character, and I forget his name, calls the study
Gilbert.
group. Gilbert, thank you. Gilbert calls the study group to Hawthorne Industries, and that there is this video game that the dad was working on and had, or not he, but he had like his own research and development team that they poured so much money into the game over the years. It was like this. It was like the most expansive, I guess you could say. It's like there's all this detail in the game. There's so much stuff that you could do. And so like as they're just kind of learning, they realize they're also competing with Gilbert for getting to the end of the game, because the end of the game meant if you got there, you got control of Hawthorne Industries. And so the whole episode is like them exploring this video game world. And it's so funny, all the different reactions that everyone has, of like some who think they're good at it and they're not, of like what this old racist man put into his video game, of Abed just like finding a second life, like the world that he finally fits in and he can understand everything, and so he can find love and create a family, and all the stuff that Abed does in the game is just so hilarious. And of course he's the one that saves the day at the end. But this episode also has really good character moment for both Pierce and Gilbert, who ends up being a recurring character, because these are stepbrothers, or half brothers. I don't remember the exact relationship, but they are pitted against each other essentially to take control of Hawthorne Enterprises. And so when Gilbert gets to the end and he's the first one there, he doesn't actually win. Why? Because he's black and because he's a bastard. And so the dad is like, you thought I would give control over to you, or did you really think that, sort of thing? And it's like the hurt that Gilbert has, because like all he ever wanted was to prove himself to his dad. And so like for that, like Pierce was able to be an actual brother with him, and he was able to be like, screw him, we don't need him. And like they developed a relationship at the end, even though they were competing against each other the whole time. So it had a really good heart to the episode, as well as just being really funny.
And there's so many great moments, like all the little avatars of them look like little 80s video game versions of everybody. And I love Jeff's line in the beginning: 100-year-old man made a 30-year-old video game. This I gotta see.
I think it was Annie, like when they go into Shopkeeper, and like Annie keeps killing people. It's like, well, now I have to go kill the shopkeeper's wife. Like we can't leave witnesses. I love what she turned into in the game.
Was that where they said something like, well, he was suffering from axe wounds when you threw axes at him, or something like that?
It sounds familiar. Or like how Britta actually did good in what she was doing, and like she was actually right as something, and then no one was paying attention to her.
Oh no, what happened was Britta made this was supposed to be the strength potion, and everybody else knew. Okay, Britta totally screwed this up. So they made sure that when Gilbert was around, they'd be like, Britta, don't make sure that he doesn't get this strength potion. And then Gilbert's like, I'm going to take that. He drank it. And of course, that killed his character and he had to start over again because they were counting correctly on Britta screwing up.
That's right. I was just remembering that she was the one that like found the secret potion area or whatever. And was like,
Yeah.
haha, did it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was a great pick.
Thank you. It's a great episode.
Yeah. Well, I've already given away my number one pick, which I think is the pinnacle of them doing theme episodes, which is called Basic Lupine Urology, which is a play on the word Dick Wolf, who's the executive producer of Law and Order. And I went for a while. I watched some of Law and Order SVU, and you definitely appreciate this episode more if you've seen some of it because all the beats are the same. They have the same style. Like it's the same theme song, but it's in the style of Law and Order. They have the same chung chung and like the title cards showing everything going on. And there's always got to be some kind of murder or case that you're solving. And in this case, they're solving the death of their yam from biology class.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, someone destroyed our yam and we were going to get an A. So we have to find out who did this and bring them to justice. And kind of like we're talking about with the narrator from the Pillows and Blankets episode, their professor they had who was recurring in season 3, Professor Kane, he realizes that it's ridiculous, but at the same time, he plays it completely straight. He gets on these like super big rants, like, I grew up in prison. You grew up in the army. 2 places where a man's word is only as good as his uniform. I think these are like real thought-provoking lines that could be an actual Law and Order. And here they're talking about a yam.
Yeah, and also this episode has a great guest appearance, Michael Ironside. He's got this gravitas no matter what role he plays.
And they all fit into these roles. Like I'm pretty sure that Troy and Abed were supposed to be Munch and Finn from Law and Order SVU, to the point where I swear at one point Abed makes a facial expression that's supposed to be an homage to Richard Belzer from Law and Order. I don't know that for sure, but if you know who I'm talking about, you can see that when you watch it. And then I love the scene where they're questioning Starburns. And this is just like in Law and Order where they go behind the one-way glass, except it's just an old fish tank in storage. And Shirley calls them back, and they're having this whole conversation. And the whole time you're thinking like, this isn't soundproof. And then Starburns calls it out. It's like, I can both see and hear you.
I like a similar thing with Troy and Abed when one of the people that they confront, I can't remember the exact thing in the episode, one of the people they confront runs away, and they both turn to each other and say at the same time, why do they always, and then they realize they're about to say the same thing, so then they start over. Why do they always, and then I think it's like Troy's like, you go ahead. I was like, why do they always run? And then they both chase after him, because they're both like, they're doing the one-uppage, like, quipping at the end of everything, and they even have one of the scenes like, we can't both be the guy that quips. We can't both do that.
Well, at one point they even say, at one point Abed comes in at the end and he's acting mad and frustrated because I think the Starburns was their key witness, got away, and he's like, he's been on edge since we switched. And he's talking about earlier they talked about how Abed was the good cop and Troy was the bad cop, and then now they've switched, and like they're Troy and Abed are just loving this role. I don't think they even care about the yam. I think they just love playing cops.
Exactly. And this episode too, it also, like, the story of it is kind of intriguing too. Like the way that it unfolds, you're like, oh, what's going to happen? And then even the fact that like they have this last minute twist that they pull out too, it's like, oh, hey, I didn't see that coming. I was just along for the ride of the parody, but you actually had a story here.
Yeah, ended up being this big reveal that it was Fat Neil from the Dungeons and Dragons episode, who is a recurring character after that episode, had boiled the yam so that everybody's would fail, so that he could hook up with Vicky, so that she wouldn't fail, being the only one whose yam didn't sprout.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely. That was a good episode, and then it ends with Starburns' death. And I think that was like when it started the bad storyline of like after he died, that was what kind of kicked off the whole Greendale 7 or Greendale 6 or whatever, and then them getting kicked out and then having to come back in, and the whole absurdity of Chang's plan that kind of kicked off that little arc. So that's the only bad thing about that.
Yeah, well, the Chang arc had been going ever since he became a security guard, and I think it really got steam in the Impression episode where he finds his Chang glorious bastards.
Oh
But
yeah, yeah. Although the Impressions episode had a really great line at the beginning where the he's like going around the table and like these are all the impressions, and then there's Britta and Troy singing
yeah,
this. It's like, oh, both the versions of Michael Jackson.
that was a good one.
That was a good, yeah.
Which now that you think about it, Britta and Troy don't sit next to each other at the table, so how? Maybe they moved spots just for that joke or something.
I think they did. Oh, well, they were in the cafeteria, so the cafeteria, their sitting
Yeah.
arrangements
Is more
depend
fluid.
on. Yeah, exactly.
All right.
All right. Well, I had a question because this would actually probably be my number one if this counts as a themed episode.
Sure.
But does remedial chaos theory count as a theme?
I think so. I think it plays on the theme of multiple universes.
Yeah, and I loved that's my favorite episode of Community, period. Themed episode or non-themed episode, that is the best one. I love the whole thing. My favorite, of course, is the dark timeline where Troy goes down to get the pizza and just how everything falls apart in that universe. And you guys, even if you've never seen the show, you've probably seen the gif of him coming back in with the pizza wide-eyed because his apartment's on fire and there's Pierce laying on the ground bleeding. And it's just like, what happened while I was gone for 2 minutes?
Yeah, definitely. That is a really good visual. And just all the callbacks, like every time like Annie has a gun and Pierce is bragging about having sex with Eartha Kitt and Shirley has some bad pizza and Britta's smoking weed. There's like little storylines and how they all interact and change with just the slightest bit of this person's not here. What's going to happen?
Yeah, that was the other really interesting things. Like it really let you look into, well, what does this person contribute to the group? Do they add to it or do they detract from it? You know, what happens when their presence isn't in this group? That was the genius of the episode, to be able to play with that scenario.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. That episode went swimmingly.
Thank you for pulling out a fish. You can't make visual gags on an audio platform.
I might cut that one out. It's just hard because I'm surrounded by a bunch of random stuff because we're getting ready for a garage sale.
I think you should keep it in just because it's ridiculous, and so are we. The other episode I wanted to bring up, did you have any like honorable mentions you wanted to mention?
Let me see real quick. I think we talked about. I think most of my honorable mentions were actually your picks.
Aha.
Except for the we've talked about before. Just we can just do a brief mention of the KFC rocket episode, which was
that's a great one
really
too.
Funny. Yeah,
yeah, parody off of The Right Stuff. If you've ever seen that movie, if you have Disney Plus, they actually made the Right Stuff TV series, and they had I don't know if it's a mini series or if they're going to do more iterations of it, but it was actually really interesting, and I would suggest watching it if you have the chance with Disney Plus.
All right. I haven't seen that, so I can't speak to that. Do you have any honorable mentions?
I do. My other honorable mention was Paradigms of Human Memory. It's essentially their take on a clip show.
Yeah,
and so they're able to bring in all these clips of like that we actually haven't seen. Like the clip show is filled with references that we weren't a part of.
Yeah.
And so that is even better because it's like instead of giving you the full story of what happens in these things, you get bits and pieces and you're like, what in the world happened to the group in that episode that led them there? And so they're able to do callbacks and back and forth and running gags through all of those. And it's a really well constructed episode and a way to play off of that trope that like all these shows used to do this. All these shows have done clip shows. And so to be able to do that, but to do it in a better way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. As we're talking about these episodes, this is one thing I really love about Community is they go for it. A lot of shows would be too scared of like losing viewers or being seen as too out there to really mess with genres and do outlandish episodes. But Community is like, no, this is our thing. Like, it's not going to be every episode. A lot of episodes are just they're in school and something happens. And there's a lot of great episodes like that too. But they're like, no, when we have a good idea, we'll start with a great episode or a great TV show, movie, whatever, and think, what would the Greendale parallel be of this? And
Yep.
normally you get the dean filling in for the authority figure. If there's going to be like a cool guy character, that's usually going to go to Jeff, and they kind of just mad libs the characters in there, but then they do it so well that it doesn't seem forced.
Yeah. Yeah, like the fistful of paintballs episode was
Mm-hmm.
such a great way to do that. And then the sequel to that, like that was a two-part of the sequel, ended up being like the Star Wars more one that
Yeah.
they did.
Well, it was Western and then Star Wars. Part
Yeah.
1 was Western, and then part 2 was Star Wars.
Yeah, Fistful of Paintballs is a playoff of Fistful of Dollars, a Western movie.
Yeah.
Yeah. Another one that I really liked. I need to watch this movie because I've never seen it, but this episode made me want to watch this movie. A movie called My Dinner with Andre, and the episode I can't remember the episode's title off the top of my head, but it's My Dinner with Andre. But instead, Abed is Andre in it and invites Jeff to a dinner together, and it's a great episode. And I'm like, I'm sure I would even appreciate this more if I've seen that movie. So I want to sometime watch that movie.
In that episode, Abed makes a reference to being in the background of Cougar Town, which he
Oh, yeah.
was. There was an episode of Cougar Town where you see Abed in the background.
And then he makes a face because he describes how, like, on the set of Cougar Town he crapped his pants, and so in that episode you see him in the background, and then he makes a face like, "Oh, I've crapped my pants," and so it's like it's not just that he's on there; it's like that he's explaining what you might have seen and why it looked weird that this guy had this face on in the background.
Yeah. It's such a weird connection with those two shows. And Cougar Town's okay, it's not great, but I mean, just that connection was really good.
Yeah, yeah, it's funny how Community is so smart about how they set up jokes too. Like
Yeah.
the one episode where Abed's in the background the entire time, and
Yep.
like he helps deliver a baby,
Mhm.
and like it's really easy to miss because he's in the background.
Yeah. Another reason to buy the Community DVDs, in addition to you can watch the Dungeons and Dragons episode, there's there's commentary on every single episode. And it's a combination of Dan Harmon and some of the cast and maybe some of the writers, and it's funny. Like I haven't listened to them. I've listened to them all before. It's been a while, but they are super interesting to listen to. And most shows will do commentary on like maybe 1 or 2 episodes here and there, the big episodes. But Community's like, no, we're just gonna do them all.
We do whatever. We're our own thing.
There's one early on in season 1. I don't know if it was Chevy Chase doing a bit or if he was real. It's one of the few that actually have him doing a commentary. It's him and Joel McHale, and I think maybe Dan Harmon. And Chevy Chase was like, I don't understand what we're doing. We're talking over the episode. Who's going to want to listen to this? And like, I don't know if he legitimately didn't understand the concept of a commentary, or if he was doing a bit. But either way, it's kind of like awkwardly hilarious.
I think that describes Chevy Chase really well.
Yeah.
All right. Hey, well, let's jump into trivia. So last week we talked about pranks and we brought up the Impractical Jokers. And the question was, with the punishments that they do at the end of episodes, which Joker has done the least amount of punishments and which one has done the most?
I'm going to guess Murr has done the most and Joe has done the least.
Joe has done the least. You're right. Sal has done the most.
Okay. I can see
Sal, like, especially in the first season, it was like for the 4 out of the first 5 episodes, Sal was the one punished for like those 4. He's just because they know how to get him. It's just like there's so many things he won't do, either germ related or like really like I'm too nice. I can't go there. Whereas Joe is like, yeah, I'll do whatever. And it's like, sure, he has his weak points, that stuff he won't do, but yeah, most things. It's like, you have no shame, Joe. Come on.
Yeah, he really doesn't. And we mentioned, so the trivia question, which I came up live on the podcast, is in the episode Pillows and Blankets, it is narrated by someone who eventually joined the cast of Community, which is, wait a minute, I'm about to say the answer. No, I'm supposed to give you the question.
Which is this? Oh, I know the answer. Well, of course you do. I said it.
Yeah, okay. Who was the narrator of the Pillows and Blankets episode, and who did he end up playing on Community?
Dun dun. Nailed it.
I know how this podcast works. It's not like we've done 30 of them so far. I think this will be episode 30.
Well, we are getting to the end of May. Once June hits, we are actually going to do something where we are going to bring on a number of guest stars that we have. So starting in June, we're going to have episodes with guest stars every single week. So we're excited to bring some of these faithful listeners onto the podcast. For those of you who are listening, you're like, that's me. You can, identify yourself on Facebook if you want, or you can just let it be a surprise. So we're gonna be joined. We have 3 confirmed, 3 different ones. Yeah. And then we're hoping to even do a combined episode at the end of that with everyone. So that could be fun. We got some stuff in the works, and we'll see what happens there.
Yep. That should be fun.
But that is going to do it for this week's episode. So as always, thank you for joining us. I am Matt.
I'm Brian.
We're reminding you to stay tuned and keep watching.